How do you differentiate between various spiritual teachers, healers, guides? How do you know who to listen to? This is a big question that I've been dealing with lately. And one answer to that question has to do with their journey. And their journey consists of stories. We're always telling people, get out of your story, get out of your story. Well, yes, get out of your story if it makes you, if it limits you, if it makes you a victim. But your story, what actually happened to you, is the reason we go to see movies, the reason we write novels and read them. It's the reason that we connect to one another. Is a big part of that is about the stories, learning from other people's stories, why they did what they did, how they did what they did. And so it is with some trepidation that I would like to begin to share some of my story that I've been afraid of sharing for a long time for fear it would upset the guilty or people who assume they're guilty. I'm not making anyone guilty. I'm just saying we've all done things, me included, and there's going to be some great stories about that, that we regret, that we wish we hadn't done. And so our story is part of connecting to who we really are, what our experience has been, and how to connect deeply to that place in us, that person at that age with that experience who did what they did and that brought the good results or not. So with that in mind, I've always been a seeker for knowledge, for truth, for information. When I was just a little child, my mom said I used to point at stuff and say, "What's that?" And then she would say it, and then I would say it 3 times, repeat it 3 times, and then I would remember it after that. I wanted to know what everything was called. I wanted to know how everything worked. I remember as a child driving around in my mom's car and seeing the signs and seeing that there's something on all of these signs, which was writing, that people can understand that I can't understand. How do I understand that? I want to understand that. So I began trying to decipher and figure things out. I didn't read at a much earlier level than most children, I don't think, but I think I picked up reading quickly when I started school. And then I saw that after I learned non-cursive script, learned to write the ABCs, I saw how mom wrote, and I saw that was different. So one day I said, I took a pen and I went like this, just drew squiggle, 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 and I said, "Are any of those cursive letters?" And she looks at them and she says, "No." And later, I have to say she was actually wrong because they were all lowercase e's over and over and over again. But anyway. That's what I thought cursive looked like. I wanted to learn, I wanted to express, and I had nature or nurture, not sure what, but I tended to go for the knowledge. And mom tells a story of how a neighbor called and said, "Gail, your 4-year-old son's here." And she said, "Oh, okay." And he says, "And I just had an adult conversation with him." She's like, "Okay, send him home." So I want to talk about this because a lot of people talk about this and it's not okay to talk about. And it is true for many of us. And it's a giant challenge, and that's being outside the norm. Being outside the norm in any particular path, but one way I was outside the norm was intellectually. We realize now, although people don't talk about it, people don't accept it, there's probably 9 different kinds of intelligence. There's spatial intelligence, and parallel parking tends to be a problem for me. There's emotional intelligence, there's musical intelligence, there's all sorts of different varieties of intelligence, and we all have our specialties. We all have those things we do, whether we're the peacemaker or the mediator, whether we are extremely creative and flamboyant and entertaining, those parts of us that are really valuable. But when we go to school, a certain kind and a certain type of intelligence is valued in a specific way, and everything else is kind of undervalued. Anyway, I happen to have that kind of intelligence that they were measuring children for Someone told my mom, you need to have him checked out. So they checked me out. And I had a dramatically above average IQ, whatever that meant. And the guy who took the test, he said, the guy who gave me the test, he said, when I was 6 years old, he said, he's going to marry an older woman someday. And he was right. Twice. Not at the same time, despite the Mormon upbringing. That's a different kind of Mormonism. We'll get to that in a moment. But anyway. So I went to a special school with special kids. And I was born in the Mormon church and growing up Mormon. And mom was very devout. Dad, not so much. He was into business, making money. He was a lawyer. And he was moving forward with his career and building it up. And running into all the challenges and difficulties that you see along that path. I just watched Wolf of Wall Street. And I thought, this reminds me of some of the stuff Dad was about. Not to say it was like that. I don't know exactly. I was too young to really experience much of it. But, chasing the dream, believing what we're taught, going forward in life, trying to be a success. So anyway, I'm going to this special school, and they're pushing us all, and we're learning very quickly, and surrounded by children who also are very bright intellectually. And again, that's one aspect of it. But there's particular challenges that happen, and these happened with me. I remember going to a more normal school when I was in 5th grade. Moved to another school that wasn't in Salt Lake, so it wasn't so far away from my house. And in that school, all of a sudden I found myself using words that the other kids didn't understand. And they would look at me blankly. And somehow I figured out that this was kind of dangerous, to not be using concepts that other people understood. If they're not understanding you, you're different. To be different is very dangerous in school. We stick kids together. They have to be all the same age group, completely artificial structure. I don't know. This isn't a typical human thing, but that's how we do it, or how we've done it. Dramatically changing. See Dana Martin and Radical Unschooling for details. Yeah, you're seeing how my mind works already, which is sometimes helpful and sometimes a detriment. But anyway, so I had to dumb myself down, and I really did that. I started using smaller words and not looking for that more as much, and slowed me down. We moved in the 6th grade, and I was using the same books that I had been learning from a few years previously. I was in an accelerated program in Utah. If I'd stayed in Utah, I probably would have graduated from high school at 15 or something. But after my parents' divorce and moving back to Portland to be with my mom's family, that whole intellectual thing slowed down quite a bit. And then my mom remarried, and I moved to Southern Oregon, where I completed junior high and high school. And, the process of junior high and high school is finding your likes, your equals, the people who fit with you, and the people who fit in. And somehow, there was a little group of us who were on a specific track for the kids who didn't fit in. And it doesn't really matter whether you're much smarter in an environment where intelligence is measured and valued very highly, or much not smarter, not doing on the test what people want. You're out of the ordinary and you don't fit in, and you're not good, you're not right for that reason. And it's only recently that some of my friends have been sitting around, men in their 30s and 40s, and saying, you know what, it's okay to say, I'm pretty athletic and I do a lot of sports. It's all right. It's not okay to say I'm really smart. I'm pretty good at solving problems. There's a bit of an anti-intelligence, or at least anti-intelligence where you own it, where you claim it, where you see what your skills and abilities are. Might be one reason it took me so long to figure out who I was and what my purpose was in the world. I don't know. But a lot of us feel it. And getting to that point to say, yeah, that's a part of me I'm happy with, that's powerful. is really empowering. It's just like a woman saying, I know I'm beautiful. Many people tell me they enjoy looking at me. I know I'm beautiful. That would not go over like a lead balloon in our society. And it's unfortunate because that's what's valued and that's what's never good enough. This is a big topic for later. This is a giant topic for later. So I will not get into this because I'm starting to have some social commentary. But I'm going to get into my life again. And my life again was, so I was Mormon, and I remember I went to a conference when I was 14. They have a bunch of promotional events to like build faith weekend and week-long gatherings and for the youth. And I went to one of those, and they said, you know, Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon, and you need to read the Book of Mormon daily to get a strong spiritual witness about it, and you should be praying. And they pulled out this number, 30 minutes a day. So from just to explain how I'm a seeker, so I'm looking for the truth, and you know, intellectually it was kind of dangerous to go too far, but I had to find a way to continue building my intelligence, my light, my knowledge, to learn how the world worked. And so I chose to do that spiritually. And when I chose to do that spiritually, I started reading the Book of Mormon 30 minutes a day, which I did every day until I was 25 or something. And when I say every day, that means no 24-hour period goes by without reading 30 minutes a day. So if I was if I was at a date or at a dance and it was 11:30 and I hadn't read yet, then I would leave the dance and go read for a half an hour. And I prayed the same way. I prayed on my knees morning and night at least a couple times a day for like, what was that, 11 years, right? So that was my spiritual journey. So obviously a lot of people at that point start to do a deep spiritual journey. I know of colleagues of mine who have studied 10 religions that way, spent 2 or 3 years per religion and just dove deeply into the practices and looking for God in that way. When I was looking for God and looking through the intelligence through my path, which was Mormonism at the time, and really diving deeply into the questions that I had around soul and life and journey. And as I continued that search into what the truth is, I was gathering more and more and more and more. And as you continue to read the Bible and any scriptural work, at some point, you know, you'll be led in paths that kind of go to the side of what your prescribed representatives tell you is the truth. So here's a scripture and it says this thing, but don't believe this thing. You need to understand it this way because this is how it is. And of course, enormous social pressure keeps you from pushing against that, you know, that you might be finding out stuff that other people, even leadership around you, doesn't know. There's other things that keep us that way. You know, what would happen? You can't even, cognitive dissonance, Google it. So cognitive dissonance kicks in. But I continued in Mormonism for quite a long time. And then I ended up serving a Mormon mission to Germany, which was a great experience. Really hard as hell, but I learned to talk to God in that time. More about that later. And I got back and then returned to Germany, ended up marrying a German woman. And it was around 24, 25 where I felt like I was kind of at the end of my rope spiritually. Like I kind of studied everything and read everything and knew everything and kind of was doing everything also. You know, I found naked women attractive, which was kind of a sin if they're not married to you. So that was something I was working on. I enjoyed masturbation, which I confess several times, talked about, but you know, even the Mormon Church is chilling out about that now. But pretty much, I was doing what they said. I was paying 10% of my gross income to the Mormon Church. I was attending hours and hours of meetings every week. I was Peter Priesthood, as we called it at the time. I was doing everything. I ended up being the branch president at 24, which means I was in charge of 100 people at the age of 24, telling people twice and 3 times my age what to do and giving them jobs and making sure they were doing things right. And that was an interesting experience. Quite an interesting and young experience to have. And then, I was starting to feel unhappy. I was starting to feel intellectually like I wasn't growing, spiritually like I wasn't growing. And I didn't get any answers. I was looking around wondering what I should do and how to get out of that. And then I had a couple key experiences. One was I got to meet with some of the very high ups. Jeffrey R. Holland, who was one of the apostles, came and spoke at our or our state conference. We spoke to him. I met Marlon Jensen, who is an amazing guy, and he's basically number 16 in the list of highest people in the Mormon Church, and we were friends. Yeah, I saw some amazing teachers among the Mormons, and then I started having problems, started having issues. So within my branch, crazy things were happening, things that were happening that you would not even believe if I told you the stories. Someday they'll be in print, but you wouldn't believe them. So I took these problems to my leadership and they laughed like this is the most absurd, crazy thing I've ever heard, and they had no solutions. So they took them up a level, realizing, of course, that when someone is a leader in the Mormon church, that they expect you to know. People were coming to me saying, I've committed adultery, President. What do I do? And I'm 24. And I'm like, don't do it again? I don't know. We expect our leaders to be connected to God and talking to God. And I would be surprised if there was someone in a 100-mile radius who was praying more or spending more time trying to get knowledge from God than I was. I've always been looking for God and trying to listen. And in my mission, I learned, I had experience, I had miracles happen with hearing the voice of God and being able to find exactly that person or go to exactly that place or do exactly that thing that needed to be done to help people. So those experiences were all amazing. And I continued listening to that voice in my head and trying to listen when someone came to me with a problem and trying to speak to them in God. But you got to realize, as God would speak to them, but you must realize there's no counseling training involved in being a branch president. There's no psychological training. It was just, that's you, that's your job now, so do it. And nobody really to ask questions from. It was kind of like being out in the field, as we say in Mormonism, but just being out in the battlefield and far away from support. I was a couple 100 miles away from my next leader, and that guy was in charge of sort of a record number of people at my level, and so he didn't have a lot of time, but what time he had, he tried to help. But you're pretty much on your own, and that's my experience of both a mission in Mormonism, which I'd expected to run much differently, and being a branch president. But so people were coming to me, looking at me as if I was talking to God personally, getting all these answers for them. And I realized I didn't know the answers quite often. I had a handbook, I had some ideas, I had a couple of counselors who were assisting me, but I didn't really have answers. So I went to the next level up, and I found out they didn't necessarily have more answers than I did. And then I went to the next level, he went to the next level, and it was kind of the same thing. And then a question began to dawn on me. What if nobody in this organization, all the way to the top, knows anything more than I do? And that was a shocking thought. So one day, June 14th, I believe, 2003, I had the feeling, step away from this. And so I stepped away from this, from Mormonism. I didn't go to church for the first time in years and years. I mean, I would go to church unless I was dying, unless I was almost dead, every Sunday without fail. And I didn't go to church that Sunday, which was very strange for everyone and myself. And I gave my wife a letter to take to the guy who'd replaced me as the branch president. And I said, I want 30 days to look. And so I began studying the Book of Mormon, the New Testament, as if I had never been Mormon, looking for, well, how would I feel about it? And seeing everything through a dramatically different lens, getting some space. When you have distance to something, you can see it clearly. When you're inside it, you can't. It's kind of one of the ways, yeah, okay, no commentary. So I got some distance, and then I'd made my giant mistake and got on the internet and started reading and found out that almost everything I had been taught was wrong, or a misconception or a lie or an omission in some way. There were the entire history of Mormonism wasn't as I had been taught. The entire history of Christianity was not what I thought it was, and on and on and on. And I realized within 30 days, not only is this all dramatically not what it should be, it's not how it was when it was created, and the story behind its creation was completely different. And I realized this is not my path. And so I decided to leave. And that was one of the biggest experiences, one of the biggest decisions in my life, because all of these people that had been with me, everyone who'd loved me and supported me, my friends, my family, and everything, I'd had some slight breakup with my parents a little bit earlier that year. And yeah, but when you're in Mormonism and you say, well, if you just drift away, that's okay. They'll come get you, they'll bother you and everything. But if you say, well, let's talk about this issue and this issue and this issue. And if they can't answer enough questions, you get labeled an apostate. You're talking to the devil, because obviously you can't have questions and be a good person. You can't have questions or doubts about the Lord's true church. Okay, I will stop using air quotes. You can't have questions or doubts about... Okay, anyway. So, about this without it, yeah. You can't have questions or doubts and still be a good person. And so I was running the biggest Mormon writers website at the time, ldswriters.net. I was, high up in the leadership. I was respected. And I said, I don't believe it. And here's the reasons. And if you want to come talk to me about it, that's fine. And people started coming to me on higher levels. And I was just like, well, here's the evidence. What do you want to do about it? And nobody could answer any of my questions. Nobody resolved any of my concerns. And this went up all the way up to the area president, who's kind of the highest guy that you can possibly have access to as a lay member without going to the apostles. But many people have had the similar story as I have and have spoken to the apostles or even the president of the church without satisfaction. But this is typical. This is part of growing up. This is part of development. If you look at Fowler's stages of faith, when it's happening to you, you feel like the only one. And you think that this is your curse, or whatever's happening is just about you. But this is something that happens to a lot of people, obviously. Otherwise, we'd all still be in the church that we were born into. So I left Mormonism, and now I had a vacuum. Now it was like, what do I do? And I saw normal society, normal contemporary society, and I didn't really agree with what I saw there either. I was missing some community. I was missing some, what are the true teachings? What are the teachings for life? Sexuality, which I knew nothing about. Relationships, etc. Aside from Mormonism, I didn't have a map for living. So what new map should I use? And I tried a few different maps. And the map I ended up landing with very strongly was called Tantra. And Tantra means all things to all people. But to me, it was deep and profound teachings about the masculine and the feminine and energy and consciousness. It gave me a map for relating to the opposite sex and understanding myself, and ways to interact and connect on a deeper level than simply intellectually with words, with energy, with eye gazing, with physical exercises, that are mostly non-sexual, to be honest. And it started me on a path of deep searching. Later, I was to find out that a lot of the adepts and the advice about Tantrism is this is an all-inclusive paradigm. It includes sexuality. It includes everything about who you are. Whereas a lot of spiritual paths concentrate on meditation, connecting to God, forgetting about the body, disconnecting yourself from the body, just connecting to the spiritual. And that was somewhat of my experience with Mormonism. Because Mormonism didn't talk a lot about sex, except to basically say how various ways you could do it were bad and wrong. So I dove into Tantra, and what people also said about Tantra was this is the turbo method of spiritual growth. This is how to find more knowledge quicker. And that sounded good, and I didn't realize probably the reason they say that is because You can make so many larger mistakes faster and have a lot more pain to get that knowledge. Once you sort of take the guardrails off the mountain, you may be able to drive or walk wherever you want and see things you hadn't seen before, but you may also leave the road a couple times and go careening down the mountain, which may be dangerous and definitely isn't for everybody. But I found the intense path, I enjoyed it. I wanted the intense thing, quick, intense. I want to learn as much as possible, experience as much as possible. Although I was rather cautious and shy in a lot of ways, but I wanted to develop and learn what I could. And so I did Tantra, and I did Tantra for 4 years, almost full time. Like I signed up for everything that my teacher offered. I was practicing. I started a tantric temple. We were doing healings. I was doing healings. I was working with men and women. I studied a half dozen different modalities. I'd found Reiki in 2005. I ended up starting Tantra in 2008. I did another session of Reiki 2. I did craniosacral training, bioenergetics training. This is all on my website. And I found a whole new world through that. I found a world where teachings about energy, we talked about healing people in the Mormon church, but now I was doing it. I was putting hands on people. People were telling me, you have golden hands, you have magic hands. Actually, it was in German, so it was, du hast goldene Hände, deine Hände sind magisch, right? Or Czech people, when we were doing the workshops, they were very excited about the work I was doing, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just touching, just being conscious, just being present with people, and they were having amazing results. For them, that's what they were saying. Migraines were going away. People were having conditions change powerfully suddenly. And I thought, maybe there's something to this. Maybe I can even do this as a job. It dawned on me. So I ended up doing all those things that I talked about, studying deeper, getting into creating the own temple and doing work privately with people and teaching workshops, weekends, things like this. The thing that I noticed, however, is that I tended to work with the crazies, the intense people, the people that like to dive in deeply, dive in all the way, the people with the most intense traumas, difficulties, experiences, and most of these tend to be my colleagues, or friends, people who actually drop their whole lives and start following this path of Tantra or energy or healing. A lot of us have incredible traumas behind us. A lot of us have amazing challenges, stories that, leave my jaw open every time I hear them. But this is where I really enjoyed working. This is what I really enjoyed doing. And I had some sort of an intensity. There was this, with this group, that really gave me a lot of energy and a lot of joy. It's almost 30 minutes now, so I think I'll stop and continue more next time, this little experiment, and we'll see what happens.